Hey there, it's Thomas Cox, and I am here with a presentation on EOS Governance. This is a brief and very subjective overview by me as of today, the 14th of July, 2018. And I'll be making a copy of these slides available to you via a link at the bottom of this video. Okay, so quick question. What is governance anyway? Well, governance is a system of making collective decisions. It is a system also of carrying out those decisions. And thirdly, it's a system of tweaking the decision-making rules. For example, let's say you wanted to vote on a change to EOS inflation. Actually voting to change EOS inflation would be part of governance. Then actually changing EOS inflation is a separate step or a different aspect of governance. You could have a vote separate from the actual change. And then thirdly, amending the rules for voting, say on inflation or voting in general. I saw one proposal that said that changing inflation would require a 75% voter turnout, unlike other votes. That didn't make it through into the current mainnet, but it was proposed. And then tweaking those rules is all part of governance. So making the decision, carrying out the decision, and tweaking the decision-making rules, all part of governance. Yes, yes, good. So what do we know about governing ourselves in communities generally separate from the blockchain, and what can we learn from what we already know about humanity? And one answer is from a lovely book called Governing the Commons by Elinor Ostrom. She uh, shared the 2009 Nobel Prize in Economics for her lifetime contributions to an understanding of how people manage common pool resources, like a blockchain is a common pool resource. So in what she found studying dozens and hundreds of communities around the, the world, and studying people who'd studied them and reading their papers and finding out for herself, is that a community always needs, it seems, based on what we see out there actually working for hundreds of years at a time, and in some cases over 1,000 years of continuous success, the community needs to, number one, define clear group boundaries. Who's in and who's out? If you can't say which people are allowed to take part in the common pool resource and which ones can't, you don't have a community and you can't govern your common pool resource without clear boundaries. Number two, you got to match the rules to local conditions. For instance, one token, one vote might work great over here, but not work great over there. To give one of Elinor Ostrom's examples, in the same overall irrigation system, they used a water auction in one place, but they didn't do an auction anywhere else because the place where they did the auction, they had a visible pool of water that everyone could look at in order to do auctioning that day, and everyone else just used time sharing because there was nothing to look at, right? So the rules had to match the physical conditions in existence in each of the locations. Number three, you've got to ensure that the people affected by the rules can participate in modifying the rules. That's why we've got to have a functioning referendum system and really good uh, ways to discuss things with each other. Number four, she found, you have to make sure that the rulemaking rights of the community are respected by outside forces. Many times she found examples where a community was trying to make things work great, and then some federal organization would come in and smash it all up and ignore what the locals had done, completely screwing up the way they were self-governing and harming the common pool resource in the process. Number five, there are 8 rules, by the way. Number five, the community members can monitor each other's behavior, right? Because this is about cooperating to manage the common pool resource. They have to monitor each other's behavior. And number six, have graduated sanctions for rule violators. And typically these were actually quite small sanctions, but they had to be applied rapidly and reliably. Number seven, the community needed access to low-cost methods of dispute resolution. And number eight, they needed to be structured in a way where there were nested tiers from the lowest level, the grassroots, all the way up to the top in an interconnected system. And what I'd like to look at is how each of these is already managed in EOS today. Number one, group boundaries, token holders who sign the Constitution are in, other people are not. Number two, matching rules. We have blockchain and enclave specific rules already, and we're set up to continue to have more of that. Number three, Those affected by rules participate in referenda and discussion groups. We have the referendum contract coming. It's not ready yet, but it's on the way, and the discussion groups could be better. The rulemaking rights of the community respected by outside forces. We use an UNCITRAL-based arbitration rule set, which is respected in over 150 countries around the world who have signed the 1958 New York Convention on respecting foreign arbitral rulings. So we have every reason to believe that as long as we have confidence in ourselves and actually use our own arbitration system, that it will be binding and that other entities, including nation states, will respect our results. Number 5, can we monitor each other's behavior? Yes, blockchains are public. We're already seeing close scrutiny of who's voting for whom and which block producers are being honest. Graduated sanctions, number 6. We do have Ricardian contracts and the Constitution. We have arbitration plus the sudo capability is required, but it's unproven. Sudo is not yet installed, and we've not run all the way through a sanction cycle once to prove that we can do it, which is why people are feeling some doubts. Accessible low-cost resolution of disputes. Well, we do have an open market for arbitration. Anybody can create an arbitration forum, and we have a default forum already. And number 8, nested tiers. We have the existence of nested enclaves baked into the design of the system, but it's not yet been proven and demonstrated. The design supports this fully. We just have to do it and then see ourselves doing it and then notice that we've done it and that it's successful. So we're very close to having everything we need, I think, to governing ourselves. So let me back up and set some context here. EOS is going up into the world in the context of public permissionless blockchains. And I want to talk about what the promise of public blockchains generally has been. Well, the big promise is decentralization. Yes, and censorship resistance and some other things, but decentralization is a big one because it empowers individuals and small groups. And it makes it easy to compete and better serve customers. It's very exciting. What's the problem with these public blockchains so far? Well, it's been also decentralization, that nobody's in charge, so crooks can go wild, and they have. Up until now, the code is the law, so one bug and you're just totally screwed. And in less than a decade, hackers have stolen, well, by one report, $1.2 billion worth of Bitcoin and Ether. It's actually quite a bit larger. So here's just somebody's graphic of the biggest cryptocurrency hacks and scams. The speed of crypto hacks is picking up. It's about 71 million a month being stolen from various sources. There was a $500 million theft of NIM from CoinCheck in early 2018 and so forth. My favorite example, and I'll be referring to this one repeatedly because it's very important, $300 million in US in cryptocurrency accidentally lost forever due to a bug. And look at the subheadline. User mistakenly takes control of hundreds of wallets containing cryptocurrency Ether, destroying them in a panic while trying to give them back. It's pathetic. And this was from November 2017. Now, I'd like you to just pause for a moment and imagine that you're in charge of bringing your company onto the blockchain, and you're going to try to talk to your boss. No. It's after you've gone on the blockchain, and you have to go to your boss and say, yeah, boss, I put our money in this wallet, and it blew up, and the money's just destroyed forever. Or let's say you got to go to your customers and explain that to them. You would be fired. You would not get new customers. This is why people aren't building on these blockchains. It isn't working. The only big players so far in public blockchains have been speculators playing a zero-sum game. When they buy low and sell high, it's because somebody else bought high from them. Speculators do not create wealth. Number 2, miners who create coins, but they don't create value. And number 3, crooks engaged in a negative sum game. And that's it so far, because there have been no real disincentives to bad behavior. There's been attempts to prevent it, but there's no disincentives. And that's why we need a public permissioned blockchain, also known as a governed blockchain. Let's see what that might look like. Now, to understand this, I want to introduce you to an interesting framework, a useful framework for looking at how technology platforms work and how human behavior faces four types of constraints on technology platforms, one of which is market forces, another is legal forces, a third is social forces, and the fourth is code. And this was written up by Lawrence Lessig in the New Chicago School Model back in '98. And he was analyzing the internet generally, not cryptocurrencies, but it's the same four forces. Now let's look at what we already know about cryptocurrencies and blockchain through this lens on constraining human behavior. Let's look at Bitcoin. We've got code creating market incentives to secure the chain, and that's it. There's a little bit of law enforcement coming in from the far right, but it's off-chain, it's conventional law enforcement, and they might chase you down if you steal enough from enough people and you're a bad enough actor. But most small thefts go completely ignored. Okay, what about Ethereum? Well, Ethereum also uses the code to tweak market incentives. In fact, Vitalik Buterin himself said that all of cryptoeconomics is tweaking code to tweak market incentives to bring about the behavior you want. Guess what? Law enforcement is still completely off chain, and there's a little bit of social forces through the EIP process, but it's very weak. There's no clear decision making. And in fact, here in July 2018, as I record this, back, I believe it was early July or late June, there was a huge Ethereum governance meeting, and all the big hitters showed up. And I was excited because they're like, wow, it's Ethereum. They're the big boys, and they're going to talk governance. I'm going to learn something. And so I followed very closely the outcomes of that. And the big takeaway that I heard was that they decided after that they needed to, number one, figure out who their stakeholders were, and number two, figure out how to find out what the stakeholders wanted. Yeah, that's why I put social off-chain and small and gray, because they don't have it. Okay, what about EOS? What if we used code to tweak market incentives, plus we made the social and legal forces co-equal participants in the entire system on purpose, designed it all together to be a governed blockchain? How might that play out? Well, let's look. We have the market forces, you got skin in the game, you need to stake things, you're running a risk of sanctions and losing your stake. From a legal perspective, we have a system built on a constitution, Ricardian contracts, and a system of arbitration. Socially, we're expecting people to engage in repeated interactions, to have some form of identity or pseudo-identity with reputation, the ability to discuss things with each other. We're actually building some on-chain communication mechanisms. And of course, code, where we actually allow the block producers who are voted in, which is a social and legal process as well as a code process. Block producers can replace code, even if the developer has marked it as immutable, freeze accounts, and even move funds, but they can only do it legally, lawfully, when ordered to do so by an arbitrator. And the arbitrator has to have been empowered by the parties in the dispute. So this is pretty intertwined, pretty intricate, and it's not all fully there yet. Let's look at these governed blockchain elements more closely. So we need to have a legislature, and for us, that's the token holders. The token holders elect block producers, and the token holders set policy via referenda. They can also do things like change the constitution and vote to change the system contract when the system contract changes are not just bug fixes, but actually policy changes. Then there's an executive branch. That's block producers. They have superpowers. They can carry out policy and they can enforce judgments, but they are expected to not use any independent decision making, with the sole exception of emergencies, when they are then expected to call in a dispute on themselves in order to involve the other parties of the governance triad. And then the third element, of course, is the judicial system, which are the arbitrators who rule on specific cases only. Right? You don't have arbitrators roaming the landscape looking for things to rule on. You have to have a particular case about a particular transaction between two particular people who have already named their arbitrator, who then open up a case with an arbitrator. One of them files a claim, the other is a respondent on the claim, and the arbitrator makes a ruling on their case and then informs the block producers that a change needs to be made to those specific accounts who are in that specific case having that specific dispute. And the whole thing is wrapped up in constitution and contract law. So I want to look in some detail at the legislative. I mentioned that it's token holders electing block producers and setting policy via referenda. This requires a functioning referendum system, and we have to have some sort of ballot access with fair limits on it. And it's anybody's guess how that's going to turn out. I have some ideas of my own, but nothing's been enacted. And this legislative power expects the voters to fire bad block producers, but it's not always happening today. That's a concern. Now, this will break down if block producers collude with corrupt whales. So this is a sensitive topic. Now, the executive. The executive power is the block producers with that superpower I mentioned to carry out policy and to enforce judgments. And block producers do have massive power, but they have no discretion. They cannot make up policy and they cannot make their own judgments. They can only carry them out. The results of a referendum, they can carry out an arbitrator-specific order on a specific case. That's all they're permitted to do outside of emergencies. And block producers are required to follow the rules of the reg producer command and also the claim rewards command, because reg producer has a Ricardian contract attached to it that they agree to every time they call that command. When they first signed up to even be voted on as a block producer, they agreed to do a whole laundry list of things. And if they ever take a single penny, a single token in rewards while not following the rules of reg producer, the reward they take is theft because they are doing it without following the rules. They've done it outside their mandate. And any block producer who is operating outside the rules can be voted out, or they could have their key nulled, which means they would have 0 votes and 0 income if they were found to have violated the rules by an arbitrator. Okay, judicial. I mentioned the arbitrators a bunch. The judicial branch is carried out by arbitrators who rule on specific cases. And they can only rule on cases that are brought to them by the members regarding some contract or transaction between them. And you mentioned the block producers. Well, the block producers are all party to this contract about how they work and how they get paid. The members select their arbitration forum in advance in their Ricardian contract, where they say disputes involving this contract will be decided in thus and such a forum. And if you don't specify it, you'll get the default arbitration, which is a group called ECAF, the EOS Core Arbitration Forum. And all of the system contracts use ECAF as their forum. They specify that via the Constitution. Every arbitrator has to follow the Constitution. They have to follow the rules of dispute resolution that are specific to their forum, and they must follow contract law. A little bit deeper on arbitration and ECAF. So I mentioned that arbitrators rule on specific cases. ECAF is the named arbitration forum in the version 1 Constitution. And ECAF uses UNCITRAL-based rules of dispute resolution. And the UNCITRAL-based rules are valid in over 150 countries around the world. The disputants are always free to leave ECAF for another forum if both or all disputants agree to disagree elsewhere. So we've got a lot of openness and flexibility here. This is a quick overview, I won't walk you through it, of the life cycle of an arbitration case from the initial filing, and in fact the pre-authorization to use arbitration that comes up when the people first agree to the initial contract, all the way through all the steps there. And then here's a drill in of some of the internal processes. Again, I'm not going to walk you through them, that ECAF is designed for itself on how to process a claim through submitting to reviewing, assigning an arbitrator, and so forth. So a lot of detail going on here. So what's the conclusion? Well, my conclusion is that EOS governance is growing up. It hasn't grown up yet, but it's on the way. EOS governance still needs more arbitrators in ECAF, and it needs more alternative arbitration forums, and these are coming. It's happening right now. It needs the enforcement powers to exist. That's sudo. The block producers have to be able to actually use the multi-sig power that was described in both the version 1 and version 2 of the white papers. The entire system is predicated on this existing, and it's just not in place yet. The referendum contract has to be rolled out and put in place. I think currently it may be in place by the end of July. There's an early version being tested. We'll see. EOS governance still needs demand for honest block producers by voters. Right now, voters are tolerating shady block producers, and that is not okay. That's going to have to change. We still need enforcement actions against people who are vote buying and vote selling. And I'm confident that that will happen as soon as it's clear that we have active arbitration and sudo powers, and as soon as we start paying whistleblowers to come up with evidence against vote buying and vote selling. I promise you, if you're a block producer and someone offers you, 10 million votes in exchange for some money, and you can prove they offered that, you should blow the whistle on them, take them to arbitration. Uh, in fact, you could be perhaps eligible for a portion of the tokens confiscated from that whale. And it would make all the other whales be reasonably afraid of enforcement. Without enforcement, I'm concerned that this entire chain could collapse. So we got to have enforcement actions. And I think we need key recovery. It has to be implemented by Block 1. I don't know when that's coming, but it's an important thing. If you look at the number of cases that have been filed by people with the arbitrators and ECAF, key recovery is the single biggest problem people are facing, because the key recovery mechanisms that were promised in the white paper just haven't arrived yet. That's tremendously important. Okay, so that's an overview of governance, where it's at and what's missing. If you have questions, please go to this URL. It is https t.me, that's Telegram, /EOSGOV, EOS Gov, that's the EOS Governance channel. You'll find it's a great starting point to find all of your governance questions answered. So there you have it. I'm Thomas Cox. This has been an overview of EOS Governance as of July 14th, 2018. Who knows what tomorrow will bring, but that's how I see it today. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you online. Take care.